Another day has come and gone in this once-in-a-century national battle for our country. Yesterday, more of our neighbors had to say goodbye to loved ones whose lives were claimed by this virus. Yesterday, more doctors and more nurses worked long shifts on the front lines, fighting to heal strangers and limit a national death toll that now exceeds 150,000. Yesterday, more workers brought home pink slips. More Main Street businesses saw the end of their PPP lifelines fast approaching. Yesterday, more laid-off Americans filed new claims for unemployment insurance or laid awake wondering about next month's rent. Yesterday, more school officials wondered what to tell parents, students, and teachers about September. So what happened here in the Capitol yesterday, Madam President? With the American people fighting all these battles and more, what did the Speaker of the House and the Democratic leader do with yet another day of deliberations? Yet again, it was the exact same refrain. It never seems to change. We're feeling optimistic. We spoke very politely to the administration, but we're still nowhere close on substance. It's now been more than a week since Senate Republicans released a serious proposal for another major rescue package, $1 trillion for kids, jobs, and health care. The Democrats are blocking it all. It's like they expect applause for merely keeping a civil tone with the president's team. Never mind, they're still obstructing any action for our country. Senate Republicans want to revive a federal add-on to unemployment insurance, which the Democratic leader would not let us extend last week. We want to send another round of direct checks straight into families' pockets. We want to supply generous new incentives for rehiring American workers and workplace safety. We want to send historic money to schools for reopening and invest even more in testing and vaccine research. We want legal protection so schools, churches, charities, and businesses can reopen. The Democrats say they want many of the same things. I certainly believe that many of my Democratic colleagues who serve as ranking members want many of the same things and could easily find common ground with our chairman if the Democratic leader would let them talk. But instead, we've gotten a full week of the Speaker of the House and the Democratic leader shutting out all of their own members and refusing to move an inch off of demands that everyone knows are outlandish. The Democratic leaders want the entirety of their massive far-left wish list, all of it. Speaker Pelosi is still agitating for strange new special interest carve-outs for the marijuana industry, and even claiming they are COVID-related. She said that with respect to this virus, marijuana is, quote, a therapy that has proven successful. You can't make this up. I hope she shared her breakthrough with Dr. Fauci. In the other corner, Leader Schumer is still demanding massive tax cuts for rich people in blue states, or he won't let any relief become law. These are the kinds of non-germane pet projects that our Democratic colleagues are demanding.
See the screen, guys.
Dime for kids, jobs, and health care, unless the administration lets them check off every left-wing lobbyist Christmas 5 months early. Let's listen to what Speaker Pelosi's own House Democrats said about this bill when they passed it. Here's what House Democrats said about the bill that Speaker Pelosi and the Democratic leader now say is their absolute red line. One quote was, "The partisan nature and wide scope of this bill makes it doomed upon arrival in the Senate." Another, "In response to COVID-19, our relief efforts must be targeted, timely, and transparent. The HEROES Act does not meet those standards." Another quote, "This isn't a plan, it's a wish list." Another quote, "Partisan gamesmanship." Another quote, "Some in my own party have decided to use this package as an opportunity to make political statements and propose a bill that goes far beyond pandemic relief and has no chance at becoming law, further delaying the help so many need." Now, Madam President, those are quotes from House Democrats, views about the so-called HEROES Act. But now the entire thing is the price of admission for giving hard-hit Americans any more aid. What worked back in March with the CARES Act were productive and good faith conversations between chairman and ranking members, a bipartisan process led by members. But this time, the Speaker and the Democratic leader have forbidden their members from negotiating at all. The ranking member on health cannot even discuss testing with Chairman Alexander. The ranking member on small business cannot even discuss PPP with Chairman Rubio and Chairman Collins. No, the Speaker and the Democratic leader only want themselves at the table. So that behind closed doors, I can say that nobody gets another dime of federal unemployment money, nobody gets extra school funding, and nobody gets more money for testing and PPE unless they burn cash on 1,000 unrelated things. I'm talking about things like stimulus checks for illegal immigrants, $1 trillion slush fund for states, even though states and localities have only spent a quarter of the money we sent them in March. Let me say that again. $1 trillion slush fund for states, even though states and localities have only spent a quarter of the money we sent them in March. In my state, the state administration only spent 6% of the money we sent them. 6%. Diversity and inclusion studies, a soil health program, and on and on and on. The House bill does all these things while completely forgetting a second round of paycheck protection program. No second round for PPP. And sending less money for schools than the Senate bill. This is what they won't budge from. And every day the script is the same. And the script is, we had a pleasant conversation, but we don't feel like making a deal maybe tomorrow. Here's the problem. Every day the Democratic leaders repeat the same act here in the Capitol. They're letting down the struggling people who need our help. Day after day, Americans are trying to stay above water. Layoffs, benefit cuts, threats of eviction, the possibility of losing a family business forever. Towns wondering if their main streets will ever come back. School principals with no idea what to tell communities. That's the reality in Kentucky and in all 50 states. And none of these people are helped one bit, not one bit, by the Democratic leaders' charade. What American families need is an outcome, a bipartisan result. Senate Republicans have had a roadmap sitting on the table for more than a week. We didn't put every Republican wish list item in history into an 1,800-page encyclopedia and insist on starting there. We built a serious starting place based on the bipartisan programs we passed back in March, unanimously, by the way, and what the country needs now. If our colleagues across the aisle would do the same, frankly, if our colleagues across the aisle were even allowed to take part in the discussion, we could get this done for our country. We did it in March. We could do it again, but both sides have to actually want
it. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Now, Madam President, I just listened to my friend, the Republican leader. The Republican leader is so tied in a knot by his own caucus and his president that all he can do is give Alice in Wonderland partisan speeches. All he can do is threaten to force sham votes that will not pass and will not answer the anguished cries for help that are coming from so many of our fellow Americans. On the other hand, over the weekend and yesterday, Speaker Pelosi and I continued our negotiations with the White House on the next phase of COVID relief legislation. After a week of stalled talks, because Republicans could not articulate a position on hardly anything, I believe we're making progress. We came closer together on several issues. However, we remain far apart on a number of issues, but we're finally moving in the right direction. At the moment, the gap between our two parties in the negotiations is about priorities and about scale. As this huge crisis engulfs our nation, Democrats believe we need a bold, strong, and vigorous response from the federal government. It will take a lot of resources, but if we don't commit those resources now, for sure the cost will only grow in the months to come. Democrats are fighting to meet the needs of a desperate nation. Our Republican friends, however, President Trump, his aides, and Republicans in the Senate, do not seem to appreciate the gravity of the situation. They do not understand the needs of the country that are so great, and they are not stepping up to meet those needs. This disease has washed over our country like a great flood, and Republicans are acting like we need to fix a leaky faucet. Some of our Republican friends seem to be going through the motions, content to pass a bill, any bill, so they can check the box and go home. But a bill that doesn't come close to meeting the needs of America. We cannot do that. We cannot pass an inadequate bill and then go home while the virus continues to spread, the economy continues to deteriorate, and the country gets worse. No box checking will work. We need real action. We need a relief package that actually rescues American families, American schools, and American businesses, that helps defeat this evil virus and prevents our economy from sliding into a depression. And Democrats are going to keep fighting until we get there. But Republicans on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue are not yet awake to the enormity of the challenge. And we see it across a whole range of issues. For example, Democrats believe we have an obligation to help every American put food on the table. Our Republican friends start negotiating by saying they don't think we need to do anything to help hungry families and children. But maybe they can compromise and help feed a small percentage. That's not going to cut it. Let's say 1 million families can't feed their kids. The Republican bill has 0, and we cover all 1 million. To say let's compromise and only cover half of them is cruel and not going to solve the problem. We want to see all our schools reopen in the fall. But they need the resources and guidance to do it safely. Not 25% of the resources, not half. Schools need funding for masks and PPE, for converting space into more socially distant classrooms, for updating their ventilating systems. Some need to double the number of buses to prevent packing kids together on the morning route to school. It's going to cost money, and Republicans have to understand that. Parents must have confidence that if their school is going to reopen, it has the protocols and infrastructure in place to keep their children safe. It's the same with unemployment. Over 50 million Americans have filed for unemployment, with millions more filing new claims each week. We propose extending the unenhanced benefits that Democrats secured in the CARES Act through the end of the year. The policy has kept as many as 12 million Americans out of poverty and boosted consumer spending, one of the few bright spots in our economy. But Republicans are intent in slashing those benefits or letting them expire long before the crisis is over. One Republican proposal would give newly out-of-work Americans a 30% pay cut. Another would give them a 33% pay cut. The Trump administration's own Department of Labor warned us that these proposals, which would pay a percentage of a worker's former wage, are patently unworkable. It will take weeks and months if we adopt the Republican proposal before any checks wind up in the hands of millions of Americans. And our state unemployment offices who administer this program agree. So Republicans need to step up to the plate and work with us to find a solution that shields millions of jobless Americans from further economic hardship. State, local, and tribal governments have fought this evil virus on their front lines. With budgets strained, They're at risk of shedding teachers and firefighters, bus drivers, sanitation workers, slashing public services. My good friend, Senator Carper, is leading a group of Democratic senators to talk about these issues today because Senate Republicans and the White House do not believe in giving support to our state and local governments. And that's not an abstract concept. Again, that's firefighters and teachers and bus drivers and healthcare workers. We don't care if they're in a blue state or a red state. They need the help. We must also address our elections and make sure that Americans can vote safely and confidently with the new challenges of coronavirus for the first time in a national election. That means they need to be able to vote in person and by mail, whichever they choose. Adequate funding for state election systems and the post office shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is about preserving elections, making them fair, making every ballot count. That's the wellspring of our democracy, and it's COVID-related. And our Republican friends are resisting. We're still fighting to get enough funding for testing and contact tracing. It's extraordinarily frustrating that 7 months into this crisis, Democrats still have to argue with our Republican colleagues about delivering enough support for testing, tracing, Medicaid, and our healthcare system. These are just some of the many issues we need to work through. When people ask what's holding things up, it's our view that not only are our Republican friends disorganized and all over the lot, not only is President Trump tweeting about so many different things but not taking any leadership in this crisis, but most of all, that we must meet the needs of this enormous crisis and really help the American people. We need a strong, robust bill. We're working hard for that. Our Republican colleagues, inch by inch, are beginning to see the light. I hope more of them will. So there are so many issues we must work through. Democrats want to get a deal done, but we need answers for all of them, not just a few. Can't pick out one or two. Oh, we'll help schools, but not kids who need food. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. We'll help small businesses, but not the unemployed. That doesn't work. We have a big, broad, huge crisis. The greatest health crisis in 100 years, the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression. We got a lot of Herbert Hoovers over here who don't want to do anything. A lot of Herbert Hoovers on the Republican side. Well, remember what happened then. By not meeting the crisis head on, they created the Great Depression. The Republicans did under Hoover. Let's hope our Republican friends see the light and won't make that same mistake again. And let me remind my Republican colleagues, when there's a crisis of this magnitude, the private sector cannot solve it. Individuals alone, even with courage and sacrifice, are not powerful enough to beat it back. Government is the only force large enough to staunch the bleeding and begin the healing of the nation. Well, one of the main reasons holding things back, there are so many Republicans on the other side who do not believe the federal government even has a role to play. Leader McConnell has admitted not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times that there are as many as 20 Senate Republicans who will vote against any relief package for the American people. Those Republicans who seem to be the tail that wags the dog, it's a pretty big tail, though, 20 votes. Those Republicans don't get it. We know you like the private sector over government, but there are times when there's nothing but government that can step up to the plate and solve the problem, and this is one of those times. Faced with the greatest economic threat in 75 years, the greatest public health crisis in a century, more than 1/3 of the Senate Republican majority will not vote for anything to help the American people. Those very same Republicans gleefully voted to give a $1.5 trillion tax cut to help giant corporations pad their profit margins. But helping Americans put food on the table, go back to school safely, keep a roof over their heads, and survive a global pandemic, that is a bridge too far. How out of touch can they be? These folks cannot be allowed to dictate our policy. By their own admission, they won't vote for anything. Remember that when Leader McConnell claims that Senate Democrats are the obstacle to progress. More than a third of Senate Republican caucus doesn't want to vote for anything. So this week, our Republican colleagues have two choices. They can engage in the same kind of political theater that precluded the CARES Act. Leader McConnell can schedule a show vote on legislation that even his own caucus won't support. And then, in again his Alice in Wonderland style, get up on the floor and say Democrats are the ones blocking it. He can engage in the same partisan maneuvers that have resulted in failure and won't answer the anguished cries of Americans. As I said earlier, I'm going to want to repeat it. The Republican leader is so tied in a knot by his own caucus and his president that one of his only options is to give Alice in Wonderland partisan speeches and maybe force a sham vote that will not pass and will not answer the anguished cries for help from so many Americans. On the other hand, Senate Republicans could roll up their sleeves, wake up to the crisis in our country, and figure out what they can support. I think we're all ready for the Republican majority to figure out just what that is. What's dictating our policy and our positions on the Democratic side is very simple. The national need, large, large, large. That's our North Star. And we're going to keep pressing forward with the hard work of negotiations, hopeful that we can get a deal done to help the country in a time of severe crisis. I yield the floor.